many of their thoughts and aspirations, particularly when it comes to the essential reform of personal law. Here's a special report on this mega UCC poll that was undertaken over a period of 5 days between the 4th and 8th of July, covering over 8,000 Muslim women respondents across 25 states by a team of more than 800 reporters.
It is the biggest survey to gauge the pulse of Muslim women on the Uniform Civil Code. 884 surveyors across 25 states asking the key questions on the Uniform Civil Code to over 8,000 Muslim women aged 18 to over 65 years. The answers that stood out during the survey indicate a major impetus for the Uniform Civil Code among Muslim women. The respondents were asked, do you support a common law for marriage, divorce, adoption and inheritance? A whopping 67.2% said yes, while 25.4% said no. Do you support 21 years as the legal age of marriage for all men and women? 78.7% said yes, while just 16.6% said no. Do you think Muslim men should have the right to marry up to 4 women? 76.5% said no, while just 17.4% said yes.
If you were to break down amongst graduates, you said 76.5% have opposed the idea of polygamy or having multiple spouses, multiple wives. In this case, if amongst graduates, it goes up by another additional 2 percentage points from 76.5 to 78.5. But amongst graduate respondents, very, very few are supportive of this practice. Just about 5% saying that they don't know or can't say.
8,035 respondents took part in this survey. 884 News 18 network reporters who conducted this on-ground survey, and that means that each of our surveyors has not gone beyond an average of 9 respondents.
Top leaders of the NDA lauded the findings of the survey, calling it a wake-up call for the opposition.
जो राजनेता बिना जाने इसको अपोज कर रहे हैं, शायद इस सर्वे के बाद उनकी आंख खुलेगी और देश हित में वे भी निर्णय लेंगे।
समान नागरिक कानून अगर आता है तो सभी वर्ग के लोगों को न्याय मिलेगा, सभी वर्ग का उत्थान होगा, प्रगति होगी और उनके जीवन में आमूलाग्र बदल होगा।
पिछले 9 वर्षों में जिस प्रकार से मोदी जी ने जितनी भी लोकहित की योजनाएं रही हैं, वो प्राथमिकता से महिला केंद्रित रही हैं और युवा केंद्रित।
The survey also illuminated the stand of Muslim women on other contentious issues. Should divorced couples be allowed to remarry without any restriction? 73.7% said yes, while 18% said no. Should adoption be allowed regardless of religion? 64.9% said yes, while 22.9% said no. Should all men and women have equal rights of succession and inheritance? 82.3% said yes, while 11.1% said no. Should all Indians who have attained a majority be free to will away their property? 69.3% said yes, while 16.6% said no.
The educated class and also the younger people, the numbers are higher than the overall sample. For the overall sample, it's 73.7, whereas amongst graduates, people who are educated, it's almost 80%. Amongst young people, it's 75% who say that once a couple is divorced, then it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you should be allowed to freely remarry.
In Islam, the Prophet had said that adoption is not allowed, but the 1937 Shariat Act actually circumvents this, and Jinnah and the rest, because they were largely zamindar, said that if we don't have a male heir, they should be allowed to adopt.
75 साल हो गया, आज तक मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ में किसी प्रकार को कोई सुधार नहीं हुआ। ये तो महिलाओं के हित में है, लेकिन इसका विरोध पुरुष करेंगे, क्योंकि पुरुषों को लगता है कि उनका एकाधिकार खत्म हो जाएगा।
ये इस बात का प्रमाण आपका सर्वे भी बता रहा है कि देश के अधिकांश लोग इस समावेशी सुधार के साथ हैं, इस पर सांप्रदायिकवाद के खिलाफ हैं।
Support for reform has also been uniform across different age groups of Muslim women. News 18's mega survey has resonated in the social and political narrative surrounding the Uniform Civil Code, showing that Muslim women are primed and ready to be agents of reform.
All right, we have very special voices joining us through the course of tonight's Brass Tacks. I want to first go across to one of the most articulate Muslim bureaucrats, former Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, also an academic in his own right. Najib Jung is now joining us. Thank you very much, Mr. Jung. We've done this extensive survey on the UCC among Muslim women, and an overwhelming number, 2 out of 3, 67% say that they favor common laws when it comes to civil matters like marriage, divorce, succession, adoption, etc. What do you think of this large proportion of support among Muslim women in the Muslim community for these common laws, for these uniform civil laws?
Well, I am surprised that 67% is rather low. It should be much more, because I think uniform laws for women would certainly be in their interest, and there should be overwhelming support.
If this is what, and this is a small sample, it's about 8,000 people, if there is such huge support amongst the sample respondents of 8,000, why then is there this dichotomy between what the community is thinking and what the self-appointed custodians of the community are saying that a majority of the community is thinking? You must have seen the All India Muslim Personal Law Board's statement last week saying that the morality of the majority does not override minority rights. Why is there this dissonance?
I think, Zaka, there is more rhetoric in the objections rather than substance. Because if you look at the field, I think there would be support for it. And I don't blame the Muslim Law Board, because they don't know what the UCC contains. The government has not put forth a paper which clearly enunciates what lies for them. So I think, in all fairness to the Muslim Personal Law Board and other religious organizations, and why talk only of Muslims, the SGPC also has said things, and the Nagas have said things. So in all fairness, I think we need to see the document before we comment on anything.
Now, one of the things that's been a point of contention, Mr. Jung, is that over the years, from the 50s onwards, there have been multiple attempts at reforming Hindu personal law, either through legislative means or through the courts. Same happened in the case of Christian personal laws as well. But whenever there has been an attempt to try and reform Muslim personal law, from Shah Bano in the late 80s to banning of the triple talaq just a few years ago, it has always been met with resistance. There's been very little attempt in the last 75 years to reform meaningfully Muslim personal law.
Number one, I don't think there's resistance at all. The government bought the triple talaq, which was very easily accepted. And I think that if the government, rather than going through the entire process of a uniform civil code for the country, were to bring in an act which would empower Muslim women, then that would be a shorter way of going through. I'm not seeing much of a resistance in this. In fact, I see a much greater complication in bringing a UCC. So to say that there is resistance, of course there is resistance always in societies where there are 20 crore people. But by and large, an act, if it comes through, will find acceptance.
All right, Mr. Jung, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. That's Najib Jung. Let me also go across, this has also seen political opposition. The Congress party is opposed to it. Major opposition parties have opposed any talk of a UCC. Let me go across to T.S. Singh Deo. He's the Deputy Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh. We've done an extensive poll on the Uniform Civil Code where in our survey, more than 8,000 Muslim women have taken part, and a large number of them, 67% of them, say that they find merit in having uniform laws when it comes to things like marriage, divorce, succession, etc. How do you see it?
I don't understand why we are focusing only on a Hindu-Muslim angle or a Muslim angle. The entire UCC exercise before the election seems to be simply another political attempt to polarize voters on the basis of a Hindu-Muslim perception divide. I do not agree with this sort of thinking where such basic questions are involved. Why are we not being able to take in the Sikh community, the Jain community, the tribals, even the Hindus? What about their undivided Hindu family status? What about the right of the Hindu head of the family to deal with property bought in his own lifetime. Why are we not talking about those things? There is property which comes from generation to generation. There is property bought by an individual during his lifetime, which he can dispense in a particular way in the Hindu Succession Act, and it's different from the Muslims.
Okay, one of the things,
So
Mr. Deo, seems to be, at least one of the issues that's come to the fore, is the discriminatory nature of certain practices, which are, of course, protected as per religious laws when it comes to inheritance, for example, to ancestral property. You said Hindus have undivided family laws. Muslims don't have something like that. And also women, as per Islam, are allowed a share that is less than what men are allowed in ancestral property. Do you think that because of this UCC debate, discriminatory nature of practices which are protected under religious laws getting questioned now, do you believe that is a good practice? That is something that has come to the fore now?
You're again, unfortunately, limiting the matter to Muslims. As far as I am aware, the Muslim Succession Act is more egalitarian than the Hindu one, because in the Muslim Act, the woman is entitled to right to the property of properties made within the lifetime of the male member of the family. Whereas in the Hindus, it is the right of the individual to dispense with the property as he may will, to whether to his children or to anybody else. He can gift it, he can do anything with that property. So we are limiting ourselves to a Hindu-Muslim angle, which is completely incorrect.
All right, T.S. Singh, we'll leave it at that. Like I said, the Congress and other opposition parties have opposed any idea of a uniform civil code tooth and nail. Let me now open this up to our guests who are joining us. Our panelist, Vishnu Jain, is advocate of the Supreme Court. Tanveer Ahmed Mir will be joining us, also advocate of the Supreme Court. Lalita Kumar Mangalam is former chairperson of the National Commission for Women. And Wajad Habibullah is a former Chief Information Commissioner of India. Vishnu Jain, you know, one of the questions that's been asked by many of the panelists on the show over the last 2-3 hours or so, particularly is, A, why is the government not sharing a draft? What is there in this draft? That's number one. And number two, what are you going to do about these special groups? Tribals in the Northeast, for example. Again, in the Northeast, there are matrilineal communities. Are you going to change this? The SGPC has opposed this. So it's not just the All India Muslim Personal Law Board or Muslim women, but these are various special interest groups that have opposed to UCC. Are you going to offer them some kind of exception, some kind of exemption?
See, first of all, the questions which you have asked, let me answer that in a chronological order. The most important thing is that there cannot be any draft because we are at the stage of making a draft. In a legislative process, whenever a legislation like this, which affects the entire community or many citizens of the country, the legislative process is that first the Law Commission takes the suggestions from the various citizens of the country. That suggestions are forwarded to the members of the parliament, then it goes to the standing committee after being passed by the Lok Sabha, then it goes to the Rajya Sabha, and then the law is finally converted into an act. So this is the legislative process. So whoever is asking that please give us the draft, I must tell all of them that please participate in this legislative process. Point number one. Okay. Point number two, which you have said, that there are various groups which need exemption. Mr. Modi, who is the member of the standing committee, has given a statement that so far as scheduled tribes are concerned, they will be left out of this provisions of UCC. And let me also tell you the third point which you had raised, that there is matrilineal society. What will we do with this? So let me tell you that UCC is not going to aim and target at the particular customs of an individual. UCC will step in where there is a malpractice amongst a particular religion or a particular community. Okay. For example, polygamy. For example, bigamy. For example, female genital mutilation. For example, child marriage. For example, halala. For example, iddat. For example, sati pratha. For example, divorce, Hindu widow divorce remarriage act. So these are the things which UCC is looking at. Okay. These are the things which is gender justice issue, which is female dignity issue, is what the UCC is aiming at.
Tanveer Ahmed Mir, the underlying principle seems to be that when it comes to civil matters, marriage, divorce, succession, adoption, etc., you cannot take refuge for discriminatory practices behind protections offered by religious laws. That seems to be the overwhelming message. For example, on property rights, 82% of our respondents have said that women and men, Muslim men and Muslim women, should have equal property rights.
Yes.
Tanveer Mir.
Yes, you're absolutely right. See,
Tanveer Ahmed Mir, please. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Insofar, Zaka, insofar as the call for uniform civil code is taken into consideration, let me tell you that it is not that the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution did not debate on the requirement of UCC at all. It is for a particular purpose that UCC was not, conferred as a basic right in the Chapter 3 as a fundamental right of anybody. And that's why the drafting committee put it in Article 44 for the very reason that because this country for thousands of years has been so diverse in terms of its practices, therefore to push a UCC directly, immediately, and without a discussion may lead to many problems. Now, on gender equality, nobody can have, any reservation. But at the same time, the UCC, in terms of the noise which is taking place today, and that's why you are having a program, and you have never had a program, about 8 years ago or 2 years ago, is an issue which cannot be pushed, by issuing a whip in the parliament.
Okay.
These are issues which are concerned with balancing the basic rights and fundamental rights in terms of Article 14 and also in terms of Article 25 and 29. Both are part of Part 3 of the Constitution and are enforceable by any person who lives within India and also by a citizen. Therefore, it is imperative that, a meaningful debate means that you call all the stakeholders, you throw the policy into public domain, you make parliamentary committees, you debate the issue, you throw it to people through the length and breadth of the country, and then, take the pros and cons, take the good things, and have a final draft, and then you can debate it in the parliament. Now, the way in which the present government is moving about it is like a state of Uttarakhand, is talking about a UCC and making a draft, knowing very well that it can only make a policy and the law for the state alone. It cannot make a policy for the entire country. So there is Article 44 say that the center should, take a step in terms of directive policy to have a uniform civil code for entire country. Now, within that uniform civil code, I believe the moment you ride on the horse of exceptions, then you are riding a very, very unruly horse, which will be kicking, frothing right and left, and also on a 360 day. You cannot have exceptions at all for anybody.
So Lalita Kumar Mangalam, if you're calling it uniform, then you cannot have exceptions. That is the contention by Tanveer Mir. I'm coming down to another basic fundamental issue, and that is, let's say when it comes to adoption, as per Islamic law, adopted child is not recognized as a legal heir, especially when there is a biological child and then there is an adopted child. An adopted child is not necessarily recognized as a legal heir. Even when it comes to divorce, a Muslim woman has to go through the period of what is called iddat. It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months before she is allowed to remarry, whereas a Muslim man has no such restrictions. I think what it's coming down to, and I explained about inheritance and succession as well, what it's coming down to is you cannot have practices that are violative of right to equality among men and women just because it happens to be protected under Article 25 or protected under personal laws.
Yeah, today I don't speak as a politician, I speak as a woman. For generations across the board, and I have to admit this is across all religions, basically religion is very, very patriarchal. The Uniform Civil Code, before the Uniform Civil Code has been is being suggested to be brought in as it is now, we've had the codification of Hindu and Christian laws. all religions have been very unfair to women over the various millennia. What is in the past is in the past. Today, what the government, I think, is trying to do is bring in as much as a sense of equity amongst both and women. Now, when Mr. Tanveer says that it should apply to everybody, that the moment you bring in any point or any section that says the particular population or a particular way of life or culture or whatever other word one wants to give it can be exempt, he's right, there will be trouble. Because people will go to the courts, the Supreme Court, and it will drag out. The other point here is that an adoptive child should have the same rights as a child that is genetically belongs to a couple.
Yeah.
If you want to adopt a child, then I think it's only fair that you treat that child fairly. Now, this is under Muslim law, but the fact is that over the years, in the name of culture, in the name of politics, in the name of religion, women have not been given equal rights. Whether it is women being married off too young, whether it is women not getting a fair share in their property, etc. Let me remind all the panelists, just this recently, last year, the Supreme Court has ruled saying that under the Hindu undivided family law, girls get equal rights, and this is with retrospective effect from the mid-1950s.
Yeah.
So that has, in the Supreme Court there had to step in and bring in some sense of justice. All religions, Jain, Sikh, whether it's Bora Muslims or non-Shia Muslims, etc., everybody will have to follow and should follow the UCC. All girls should have an equal chance, at least.
Okay.
With regard to the age of marriage, it was increased from 18 to 21 just recently, as you know. All young girls want to be able to go to college. In today's day and age, where information is available at the, literally the click of a button or at the end of your fingertips, everybody wants to have a chance to be their own masters. I don't think that it is fair to say that generations and millennia of Indian customs, regardless again of the religion one may belong to, are going to be blown to smithereens just because girls are educated, or that they are given a chance to be able to stand on their own feet. I think you're being very, very unfair to women. If anybody says that,
so let me
even
ask,
if other women say that, I would say they are being very unfair to women.
Yeah, let me ask.
What the UCC does give to across the board, again, I'm saying every woman from every religion is an equal chance.
Okay.
I'm not saying that these laws may not be broken. All laws are broken quite often.
So it's about an equal chance.
It gives the promise to a young girl that yes, you too can compete.
Let me
can show that you can do it.
Sure. Let me ask Wajad Habibullah. This survey that we've undertaken, Mr. Habibullah, more than 8,000 Muslim women have participated. More than 90% of them have voluntarily shared their name, identity, address, etc. But we have withheld all of that in the interest of their privacy. And this is across 25 states, 8,000 women, more than 800 reporters have gone out. And this is not a Twitter or a Facebook poll. This is a physical poll where a link was sent to them, a mobile link. They fill up a questionnaire and then they upload that. A professional licensed software was used to collate the data, and we're presenting the results of that. Do you think, and this is something that has been sort of bothering a lot of people, you have self-appointed custodians, representatives of the community who are saying one thing, and then you have an overwhelming majority of women of the community whose opinion seems to be completely at dissonance with what these self-appointed custodians are saying, as is evident from today's survey. How would you see this dissonance?
Well, it's a little difficult to answer your question. Have you seen the draft of the Uniform Civil Code? If you have, I'd be happy to be enlightened by it, because I haven't seen the draft. And without seeing the draft, how do I tell you whether it is beneficial to Muslim women or to other Muslims or not? I think this is a question. The Uniform Civil Code does not only going to apply to the Muslim personal law, it will apply to all personal laws, I suppose. But I haven't seen the Uniform Civil Code. So please tell me what it is before I can answer your question.
No, you're right. The draft has not been circulated because right now the Law Commission is inviting suggestions from the public. But I want to ask you on a matter of principle. So, for example, inheritance of ancestral property, why should the woman be entitled to only 1/4 of the property and the man be entitled to half? Isn't that discriminatory, Mr. Habibullah?
Well, that is true of most, unfortunately, most communities. That is true. And certainly reform in the personal law. Now, if that is the question that you're putting to me, does Muslim personal law require amendment? Well, certainly. And so do the personal laws of other communities, like the Anand Marriage Act and so on, and the tribal communities, the Lingayats.
Okay.
Certainly, these all require to be brought to modernized in consonance with how the rights of women have evolved. But why are you simply raising the question of Muslim women? The Uniform Civil Code will not apply only to Muslims. Or so are you suggesting that it will apply only to Muslims?
No, of course not. It will apply to all Indians. So that's why it's called a Uniform Civil Code, which is why, Vishnu Jain, I come back to that point. Not just in the Northeast, there are other communities. In South India, for example, there are certain communities that follow matrilineal succession. The properties are inherited by the daughters and not by the sons. Will the Uniform Civil Code allow for such practices to continue, or will it clamp down on such practices and we have, common set of civil laws and a common set of civil practices when it comes to marriage, succession, adoption, etc.?
See, let me clarify this position to my understanding. According to me, the Uniform Civil Code is not going to hamper the practices which are not affecting the dignity of a woman. The Uniform Civil Code is going to affect those individuals or those communities where there is malpractice. For example, I think both the seniors and all the panelists who have spoken here, they have put up their point of view very, very nicely. And the point here is this, that we are in a legislative process and where we are talking about certain broad principles. Now, let me give you a world perspective on Uniform Civil Code. Let me tell you and let me give you the facts and figures. In 112 countries, Zaka, polygamy is banned. Out of that, there are so many Muslim countries where polygamy is banned. Then, so far as female genital mutilation is concerned, 200 million girls are affected by female genital mutilation. Around $1.4 million is spent every year so far as the diseases which arise out of female genital mutilation are concerned. So far as child marriage prohibition is concerned, let me tell you, Zaka, if India does this, India will be the first country in the world to abolish child marriage so far as uniformity is concerned with the aspect of uniformity. So I am telling you that please, when we are debating upon Uniform Civil Code, we have to keep in mind the basic grand norm that we are talking about the dignity of a woman, we are talking about equal rights of a woman, and whichever community, whichever personal law is hampering those aspects, we are going to debate upon it. There is no question of having a draft as of now.
So
we are debating as to what is the practices which are there in various
One of the arguments that's been put forth is whenever, let's say, Indian Muslims migrate to the US or UK, and this is the Western liberal democracy ideal, right? That just because you happen to be from A religion or B religion, it doesn't mean that you don't have one civil law. In the US, all citizens of that country have one civil law. In the UK, all citizens of the UK have one civil law. So if Indians who migrate to those countries are okay with living with one civil law in those countries, then why are you opposed to one civil law here in India?
Well, it's an important question. You see, somebody migrating from here, irrespective of, and let me tell you, Zaka, you see, the Uniform Civil Code debate, unfortunately, is always projected in a manner that as if, it's only the Islamic community in India which has a problem with it. And that's not a fact. When you are migrating to a different jurisdiction, you obviously, stay there in terms of laws there. Now, I'll tell you two countries which are, Islamic dominant, which have implemented, in terms of restriction on absolute restriction on polygamy, means that you can only have one wife or one marriage or one spouse, is Turkey and Tunisia. In other Islamic countries, you can still have polygamy, but with certain restrictions. Now, in a constitutional democracy where you have a written constitution, in terms of rights of the citizens which flow from, the rights of practicing your religious belief with an element of freedom means that those religious beliefs are to be tested in terms of not on scientific logic, certainly not on discriminatory practices. And that's why it's upon introspection of the communities themselves that, see, even in India, what is the percentage? Polygamy is made more a political issue than a real issue on ground reality.
Okay.
Now, even amongst the Muslim community, the problem of polygamy is not more than 1%. And out of that 1%, if you do a real data analysis, you will find that people from other religions, suddenly adopt a Muslim name in order to have another spouse.
Okay.
So the reality is not so threatening that that some person will get overwhelmed. But that doesn't mean that there should not be a gender reform. And let me tell you, when you talk about uniformity, we'll still have great problems, in majority community. When you go to a place like Rajasthan, or still under Hindu law, codified, a child marriage is still, a legal marriage, but also a criminal offense at the same time.
So let me ask Lalita Kumar Mangalam, one of the things that's being, one of the problem areas that's being red flagged by a lot of folks is this HUF, or Hindu Undivided Family. Property that is owned jointly by a family, for which, tax rebates are given. If you were to own that individually, then you would have to pay, tens of millions as taxes. Yes. Will that be exempt from UCC? Can that be exempt? And if it is, then can you still call it a uniform civil code? There is no Muslim Undivided Family Act, or there's no Christian Undivided Family Act. It's only...
Kaka, I just reminded you that the Supreme Court has already struck that down. They've already said that under the HUF, women have equal rights of succession, and this is with retrospective effect from, I think, 1954 or 56.
No, but they have tax protections. There are tax implications.
And therefore...
HIBA also has tax exemptions.
There are tax implications, ma'am.
HIBA also has
tax exemptions. There are tax implications, yes, but the law has been, if the Supreme Court has said that law has been struck down, and I mean, I don't know what will happen to property that has already been inherited in the past, but certainly for property today, or ever since the law came in, and in future, Hindu women who were not treated fairly now have a chance at being at getting their fair share of the property. No, the UCC cannot leave that out. The UCC should not leave out any so-called customary law that is unfair in terms of inheritance or marriage or divorce or adoption, etc.,
okay,
regardless of religion.
Okay,
that is why it is called the Uniform Civil Code. And I'm repeating what I said earlier, that if exceptions are brought in, then I think that it's really the law really will not be as effective as it should be.
Okay, Tanveer, quick response, and then I'll get Mr. Habibullah also. Yeah, 30 seconds.
The problem here, Zaka, which is worth a debate is, for example, you create an exception for tribal communities or certain community, SC communities, ST communities, out of Madhya Pradesh, out of Jharkhand, out of Chhattisgarh, out of Northeast, wherever. And a tribal woman or a tribal man wants to marry a non-tribal person. What happens? Which code will be followed? What will happen if tomorrow there is a conflict? And uniform civil code cannot be only restricted or, it cannot be cribbed, cabined and confined only to uniform civil code on marriage. Because then it's a political narrative. Rather than a real social narrative. If it's a uniform civil code, as you rightly use the example, in United States of America, everybody has to adhere to it, whether he's Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or whether he comes from, any state of polyandry, polygamy. That's how they work. And if you have to take gender discrimination out of the question, it's not that we will continue gender discrimination for tribals, for scheduled castes, for scheduled tribes, or other people, or we'll continue, recognizing a valid Hindu marriage between a 5-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy, and then, still treated as a criminal offense. So therefore, on expanded on an interpretation and for every Indian citizen to have equal right.
Okay.
You cannot have an exception.
So let me go back to Mr. Habibullah. I come back to one of the areas that's being cited, or one of the concerns that's being cited is for Hindu laws, Hindu personal laws. There have been numerous attempts since the time of the Constituent Assembly to reform Hindu law from 1955, and then in the 60s there were multiple attempts. It's been going on and on. There have been at least a dozen attempts at changing various Hindu laws, Succession Act, inheritance, even the undivided family concept. Whereas in the case of Muslim personal laws, any attempt at reformation, whether it is Shah Bano or even the Triple Talaq, the latest one that we saw in the last few years, has been met with so much opposition, including from bodies like the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. That is why the government is claiming, the BJP is claiming, and its associates are claiming that is the need for why there should be a uniform civil code. Is that an argument that cuts ice?
Some Muslims, and certainly the clergy would oppose, clergy of any religion, why the Muslims? The clergy would oppose that. For example, the argument over the question of triple talaq. It was admitted that the idea of triple talaq is a heresy, yet it was part of Muslim personal law. So it was actually anti-Shariat, but a part of Muslim personal law. So certainly, the Muslim personal law requires to be amended, and discussed. But I think this is you will agree that this is somewhat absurd discussion when you don't know what is actually proposed. Now you have suggested which particular clause of the Uniform Civil Code will this be in regarding the equality of inheritance, and that will of course apply to all communities. It will be the Hindu Marriage Act. It will be all these taken together would be the case. Now, simply because there are certain shortcomings, certainly, in Muslim personal law, then amendment of Muslim personal law. That is what the Shah Bano Amendment had attempted. Whether that has been beneficial or not beneficial is another matter. I mentioned the Shah Bano Amendment because I had something to do with it. I was a part of the Prime Minister's office at that time. But, let us discuss something. And so far as discussing the idea of a uniform civil code is concerned, no, I would not be opposed to the idea of discussing it. But if you are trying to give the impression, and you are, that it is directed only towards Muslims, then certainly I feel that is a cause of offense.
Again, I come back to, I said this at the start of the program. The reason why we have done this sample survey amongst Muslim women is twofold. They are the victims of what we call double discrimination. They're discriminated against because they are women, and they're discriminated against because they are Muslim. So they are bearing the brunt, the worst of both worlds, as it were. And there was this narrative seemingly conveyed by All India Muslim Personal Law Board and other bodies who claim to represent all Muslims in this country, that the community is vehemently opposed to any idea of a uniform civil code. That is not what the survey has found. Like I said, overwhelming majority of the 8,000 plus respondents, 67%, 2 out of 3 are saying they agree in principle. Forget about, let's leave Hindu, Muslim, Christian out of the way. In principle, that every Indian citizen should have equality when it comes to matters of marriage, succession, divorce, adoption. The same rules should apply to every Indian. That is the point, Mr. Habibullah.
Dear fellow, may I request you to adhere to logic? Are you asking me questions as to whether Muslim personal law requires reform, or are you asking me whether the country needs a uniform civil code? Please clarify.
No. The problem is you cannot talk about reforming Muslim personal law without talking about a uniform civil code, because every time there's been an attempt to try and reform Muslim personal law, there has been opposition, including the Shah Bano case that you referred to, from the very same people. That is the problem.
My dear fellow, the principle you are asking me about is whether the Muslim personal law requires reform or not. That is the principle, isn't it?
Yes.
So of course Muslim personal law, like the religious laws or traditional laws of every community, they require reforms. Over a period of time, they do require reforms. The Quran is not a code of law, as has been clarified so many times by Muslim jurists. The Sharia is only drawn from principles of the Quran, and therefore is subject to amendment from time to time. So Muslim personal law certainly can be reviewed, and certainly it can be considered for reform.
Okay.
But whether it should be substituted by uniform civil code, that is another question altogether.
All right.
So let us. That's why I say, please apply a little logic.
Yeah, the logic is the logic is derived also from history. Anyway, Tanveer wanted to make a point, and then Vishnu Jain, after which I'll wrap.
I tell you as a culminating point, if a country like Turkey, if a country like Tunisia, if many other countries where Islamic communities or Muslim communities are predominant, can certainly debate upon these issues, where it's not a matter of, certainly it would be some amount of political manifestation there as well, but not in terms of, a perpetuated conflict between a community A and a community B. And if they can do it, certainly Indian Muslims can do it. And why not? But that debate has to be a debate within. The responsible people have to stand up to the situation, and they have to see how those countries have adopted these laws in terms of the practices of both the core religion as well as the practice which we call as Sharia, and then have a balancing approach, because by no stretch of imagination can we do justice to any religious conscience, a conscientious belief, if at the end of the day, we are discriminating our own daughters, our own wives, our own sisters.
No, I'll just make one limited point. I'm completely out of time. I don't know if the comparison, yes, there is need for reformation within Muslim personal law, no doubt about it. And maybe there are good examples in what Turkey has done or what Tunisia has done. My limited disagreement there, though, is none of those countries are democracies. If your idea or your ideal is to move towards, Western liberal democracies, then it should be what, is being followed in the UK. After all, we have a Westminster form of government, the division between executive, legislature and judiciary. We have our common laws are all based on British laws. So point is, that is the ideal that we should be working towards, not something that's followed in an Islamic nation, because India is a working democracy. It's a secular republic. Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
I was saying, Zaka, my point was only from the point of view of, since you have done a poll on a database of actual data given by 8,000 respondents.
Yes.
Now, my idea was that if in predominantly Islamic countries, this is not, an eyesore, this is not on some kind of an editing, and it's a no-go, well, it certainly should not be here as well.
Okay.
But it should not be put as a political manifestation to put one community against others.
All right,
ma'am.
Last point. 10 seconds.
We have 1.4 odd billion people.
Correct.
More than 50% of whom are women.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we all agree that all women across the board should have equal opportunity and equality along with men?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct.
I agree with that. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. The results of this survey are up on our website, News18.com. We will have these conversations through the course of the next few days and weeks, because there is definitely a lot of chatter around a uniform civil code, around having some kind of equity between men and women, between people of different religions, when it comes to civil matters like marriage, divorce, succession, adoption, etc. It should be the same set of rules that applies to everyone. I'm going to go to this piece of breaking news that's coming in. Remember, this entire thing around the UCC is mired in politics. Now the BRS has become the latest party, and Telangana Chief Minister KCR has said that his party is tooth and nail opposed to the Uniform Civil Code. KCR has said that the centre is ignoring development and creating enmity between people, adding that this is a conspiracy to divide the people in the name of the Uniform Civil Code. Let me go across to Payal Mehta, who has more details. So, what is the political rationale behind the BRS opposing the UCC?
Well, the BRS chief and the chief minister, Zakat, today afternoon met Asaduddin Owaisi, and a whole lot of representation was given to him. After that, he's come out with this statement that he just read out. Essentially, Telangana has a large sizable population as far as the minorities are concerned, and probably that's one of the reasons that KCR has decided to take this particular stand. But in principle, he's been opposed to a lot of, bills that the government has brought into the parliament, and he's taken a position as far as that is concerned, keeping the upcoming elections in mind. He has also refused to, follow the protocol and even meet the Prime Minister when the Prime Minister has visited the state multiple times. So it seems that they're completely at loggerheads, and one must understand for the bill to be passed in Rajya Sabha, it's a constitutional amendment for which you will need 2/3 of majority, and the TRS and the BRS has a substantial number of MPs in both houses, and they will also be seeking support in the coming days from like-minded opposition parties to oppose this particular bill. That's the stand of the BRS.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Payal Mehta, many thanks for joining us with that breaking piece of information about the BRS and how it's making it stand clear that it is anti-UCC. Finally, monsoon fury across northern India. The overall death toll is now at 22, 9 deaths being reported from Himachal Pradesh alone. A red alert has been issued for 7 districts in Himachal Pradesh and for parts of Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir, Haryana, as well as northern Punjab. As the national capital region receives heavy rainfall, schools in Delhi, Noida, Gurugram and Ghaziabad were closed today. Private offices in Gurugram have been advised to allow work from home. Prime Minister Modi has spoken to the chief ministers of the affected states and assured of all possible government help. Disaster relief teams as well as armed forces are on high alert. We sent our battery of reporters across the length and breadth of the rain-affected states. These are the reports that they filed.
जयपुर का सवाई मानसिंह अस्पताल देश के सर्वश्रेष्ठ अस्पताल में से एक अस्पताल इसको कहा जाता है, लेकिन इसकी वानगी देखिए कि इस अस्पताल की मानसून की पहली बड़ी बारिश के अंदर क्या हाल हो गया इसका। पूरा अस्पताल पानी पानी हो गया। आप देखिए कि अस्पताल के वार्ड में बेड पर जहां मरीज थे वहां पर आपको मोटर नजर आ रही है, पंप जिससे पानी निकाला जा रहा है, ये पाइप के जरिए वार्डों को खाली किया जा रहा है क्योंकि सभी वार्डों के अंदर पानी भर गया और मरीजों को जैसे तैसे यहाँ से किसी तरीके से परिजन लेकर गए, पूरे के पूरे यहाँ से वार्ड खाली करा दिए गए, शिफ्ट कर दिए गए। आप देखिए कि तस्वीरें देखिए कि किन हालात में मरीजों को यहाँ से ले जाना पड़ा। यहाँ सामान सारा पड़ा हुआ, उनकी दवाइयाँ पड़ी है। ये कैंसर वार्ड है। आप देखिए कि किस तरीके से एक बड़ी बीमारी का वार्ड जिसके अंदर खास तौर पर विशेष सावधानी बरतने की जरूरत है। उस अस्पताल उसमें स्थिति देखिए कि किस तरीके से बेड पूरे पानी के अंदर डूबे हुए, वहां तक ऊपर तक बेड तक पानी आया हुआ है और यहां से फिर मरीजों को यहां से हटाना पड़ा। अभी भी सामान पानी के अंदर बह रहा है और ये एक वार्ड नहीं, कतार में कई सारे वार्ड हैं जिनके अंदर सब के अंदर पानी भर रखा। और अब देखिए कि यहां से जहां देखेंगे सारे वार्डों की यही स्थिति है। यहाँ पर पीछे आप तस्वीरें दोहराएंगे, जहां देखेंगे वहीं यहाँ। और मरीज का आप देखिए कि मरीजों को यहाँ पर गैलरी के अंदर यहाँ से, क्योंकि यहाँ तक पानी भरा हुआ है, अब इसके बाद में किसी तरीके से बेड को खींचकर ऊपर लाए और कुछ अभी भी मरीज यहाँ पर गैलरी के अंदर यहाँ पर है।
हिमाचल प्रदेश के पर्यटन मनाली से कुल्लू जिला में लगातार बारिश का दौर जारी है, जिसके कारण जो है ब्यास नदी ने यहाँ पर जो रौद्र रूप जो धारण कर लिया है। मैं इसमें की सबसे पहले तस्वीरें दिखाना चाहूँ। देखिए ब्यास नदी की ये तस्वीरें हैं, किस तरह जो यहाँ पर ब्यास नदी ने जो रौद्र रूप यहाँ पर जो धारण कर लिया और बाढ़ से हालात यहाँ पर जो बन चुके हैं, जिसके कारण जो भारी तबाही यहाँ पर हुई। हम इसमें खड़े हैं रामशीलम जो हनुमान मंदिर है और वहां पे खड़े और यहाँ की तस्वीरें देखिए किस तरह जो है बाढ़ का पानी जो है मंदिर में यहाँ पर आ चुका और जब पूरा मंदिर जो इसकी चपेट में आ चुका, जो भी सामान यहाँ पे था वो भी जो है ब्यास नदी अपने साथ जो है यहाँ से बहा के ले गई है। तो अगर मैं बात करूं अब तक की, तो संपत्ति को काफी ज्यादा नुकसान यहाँ पे हुआ है। करोड़ों रुपए की जो संपत्ति जो है ब्यास नदी की भेंट यहाँ पर चढ़ चुकी है। मनाली से कुल्लू तक की अगर मैं बात करूं तो कई सारे होटल, मकान, वाहन, दुकान जो है इस ब्यास नदी की चपेट में यहाँ पर आ चुका है। और इसके साथ ही अभी तक जो जानी नुकसान है, फिलहाल जो आधिकारिक पुष्टि एक महिला की जो है मलबे में दबने के कारण जो एक आधिकारिक पुष्टि यहाँ पर हो चुकी है। हालांकि अभी ये नहीं कहा जाता कि कितने और लोगों की यहाँ पर जो है मृत्यु हुई है, वो अभी यहाँ पर नहीं कहा जाता क्योंकि आधिकारिक पुष्टि नहीं हुई। लेकिन संपत्ति को जो भारी नुकसान हुआ है, मनाली से कुल्लू के मध्य जो नेशनल हाईवे 3 है वो पूरी तरह से जो क्षतिग्रस्त हो चुका है। कई स्थानों पर जो पूरा का पूरा मार्ग जो है बाधित हो चुका है। इसके साथ ही जो रात की खबर है कि जो आलू ग्राउंड में जो 27 से 28 लोग जो वहां पर फंसे हुए थे, उन्हें जो प्रशासन द्वारा वहां से जो है सुरक्षित वहां से जो है रेस्क्यू कर दिया गया है। हालांकि हालात अभी भी जो खराब बने हुए, क्योंकि बारिश अभी भी जो लगातार यहाँ पे हो रही है। तस्वीरें आप देखिए, इन तस्वीरों को देखकर आप अंदेशा लगा सकते कितनी ज्यादा बाढ़ जो है इसमें ब्यास नदी में आई हुई है। और
पहाड़ों में तेज होती बारिश की वजह से छोटी काशी यानी कि मंडी इस वक्त पानी से लबालब डूबी नजर आ रही है और पंडोह डैम के खोल देने के बाद व्यास नदी आप देखेंगे तो अपने उफान पर है। ये प्रचंड वेग कर देखकर अंदाजा लगाइए कि कितनी बड़ी तबाही इस प्रचंड वेग ने मचाई होगी और ये लहरें कुछ भी अपनी जद में ले लेने के लिए आमादा हैं। और इन लहरों के ठीक बगल में अगर आप ये देखेंगे, ये पंचवक्त मंदिर है और ये पंचवक्त मंदिर दरअसल कल तक लगभग आधा डूबा हुआ था और आज क्योंकि पानी उतर गया है, ऐसे में कम से कम इसका ये जो प्लेटफॉर्म है, इसका चबूतरा है, वो दिखाई दे रहा है। लेकिन उधर वो जो लाल रंग में आप देख रहे हैं वो दरअसल शमशान है और शमशान कल पूरी तरीके से जलमग्न दिखाई दे रहा था। लेकिन जिस तरीके से पहाड़ों पर बरसात हो रही है और बरसात की वजह से पानी लगातार भरता चला जा रहा है डैम में, ऐसे में माना यह जा रहा है कि पंडोह डैम के गेट कभी भी खोले जा सकते हैं। क्योंकि कल जब 4 गेट पंडोह डैम के खोले गए थे तो तबाही भीषण आई थी और ये जो पानी आप यहाँ देख रहे हैं तेज वेग के साथ बह रहा है, दरअसल ये जो पानी है ये यहीं तक सीमित नहीं था, ये पानी उतर गया है। हम आपको दिखाएंगे, देखिए ये जो पूरा इलाका, ये कटान आप देख रहे हैं, ये पानी बढ़ते बढ़ते ऊपर की तरफ आता चला गया और आपको दिखाते चले कि ये पानी यहां से होता हुआ, ये जो कटान आप देख रहे हैं, दरअसल ये देखिए ये जो कटान और ये जो मिट्टी आप देख रहे हैं कि यहां से होता हुआ पानी ऊपर पहुंचा। और ऊपर कहाँ पे, ये आप हनुमान मंदिर देख रहे हैं, ये हनुमान मंदिर भी पूरी तरीके से डूबा नजर आया था कल, लेकिन आज क्योंकि पानी उतर चुका है थोड़ा सा, इसलिए स्थिति थोड़ी सी सामान्य दिखाई दे रही है।
76.5% of the respondents say no, 17.4% of the respondents say yes.
Older people seem to be favoring the idea of having multiple wives for Muslim men, but amongst younger people and graduates, it is far less.
Should adoption be allowed regardless of religion? That's the next question on the News 18 UCC survey, India's biggest survey.
Amongst the graduates, it does go up by about 5%.
Should men and women have equal rights of succession and inheritance? 82.3% have come out and said yes.
Almost 9 out of 10 are saying that it should be equal rights.
Should all Indians who have attained majority be free to will away their property?
69.3% of our survey respondents say you should have the freedom to will it the way you want.
जब दुनिया के अधिकांश मुस्लिम देशों के अंदर एक ही सिविल लॉ जारी है या लागू है, तो भारत में कोई अलग अलग सिविल लॉ होने का कोई औचित्य नहीं था.
I feel it has given a religious tone to the whole issue. That I think is very, very unfair.
इस अमृत काल में जो कॉमन सिविल कोड को लेकर के मंथन हो रहा है जी, मुझे पूरा यकीन है, पूरा विश्वास है कि इससे अमृत जरूर निकलेगा.
Political parties who are opposing the rights of women, let their eyes be opened. Let them look at the situation.
The policy decision DMK is opposed to.
Do you support a common law for marriage, adoption, inheritance, divorce? If common marriage age has to be 21, it will be 21 for everyone. If inheritance equal share is the one that is mandated, it will be the one for everybody.
Ahead, and I think if you look at younger people and graduates, the idea or the affirmative to raising the marriage age to 21 seems to be far more than in the general sample response.
Absolutely, and the more educated, the younger they are, the more informed they are, and of course they are also driving the opinion, ladies and gentlemen. 51% of our population is women. 49 to 50% of the population of Indian Muslims in our country is also women. Quick overview of the methodology that we've used on India's biggest survey on the UCC. 8,035 respondents took part in this survey. 884 News 18 network reporters who conducted this on-ground survey, and that means that each of our surveyors has not gone beyond an average of 9 respondents. So that's the spread, ladies and gentlemen. 25 states and union territories covered in this exclusive survey. 20 languages in which the survey was conducted. So the questions were translated into 20 languages so the women there in these regions could understand the question and answer. Women across regions, communities, educational, marital status have been surveyed. Muslim women. On-ground survey conducted between the 4th and the 8th of July. That's the dates. Professional licensed software was used to collect the responses, and of course we have tabulated it in-house. So kudos to the team at the back end who've put in hours of work over many days to get you these numbers, crunch them and get you the most important insight. Now, these are the two questions that we have brought to you through the course of the day here on this special broadcast. Do you support a common law for marriage, divorce, adoption and inheritance? And that's it. The second question that we've asked, so let's look at the response for the first question. The first question, the response, an overwhelming 67.2% say yes, 7.4% sitting on the fence. Do you support a common law on marriage, divorce, adoption, inheritance? Then let's quickly get to you the second question that we've showcased through the day. There are 7 questions in this questionnaire, important ones. Question number 2 is a simple question on India's biggest survey on UCC. Do you support 21 years as the legal age of marriage for both men and women? Across the board, 78.7% have said yes, an overwhelming number. And if you break it down by age groups, with Zaka will in just a bit, it just becomes, the numbers only balloon up further. And then it becomes an absolute brute majority of people who say, yes, it's high time we did it. Without wasting time, and let's quickly go across to the other question that start with here on this very special broadcast. Do you think, the question is, do you think Muslim men should have the right to marry up to 4 women? Do you really think Muslim men should have the right to marry up to 4 women? Polygamy, should it be allowed? Let's look at what the numbers suggest. The numbers very clearly say no. 76.5% of the respondents say no. 17.4% of the respondents say yes. 6% odd are sitting on the fence. This is the overall number of the sample, 8,035 women. Let's go. Questions 1, 2 and 3 to Zaka as he breaks it down based on the nature of the respondents. Yes,
yeah,
Zaka.
I think this question about whether Muslim men should be allowed to marry up to 4 wives. They are legally allowed as per Muslim personal law to have up to 4 wives. I think this is one of the most repulsive sort of practices, because if you look at modern day marriages across, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, etc., the concept has now wired down to one husband, one wife, or one person, one spouse. Basically, the foundational the foundation of modern day marriage is built on fidelity. So having 4 wives is something that is a repulsive practice. But there again, if you were to break down amongst graduates, you said, 76.5% have opposed the idea of polygamy or having multiple spouses, multiple wives. In this case, if amongst graduates, it goes up by another additional 2 percentage points from 76.5 to 78.5. But amongst graduate respondents, very, very few are supportive of this practice. Just about 5% saying that they don't know or can't say. Again, if you look at age-wise breakup, in the younger demographic, 18 to 44 demographic, again that number has gone up by 1.5% from 76.5 to 78. Here again, the percentage of people who are sitting on the fence and not taking a position against polygamy is much lesser compared to the overall respondents. The older people, again, there is almost a 5%, in fact 5.3 percentage difference between the total respondents and the older people. So older people seem to be favoring the idea of having multiple wives for Muslim men, but amongst younger people and graduates, it is far less. So I think, again, it comes back to, like I said, if for everyone, for Hindus, Christians, Parsis, Sikhs, the whole idea of marriage in this day and age has come down to, one husband, one wife, or having one partner. It is built on the concept of fidelity. Then having multiple wives, I think, is a repulsive
The more educated,
idea.
the more informed you are, the more nuanced your understanding. Just quickly, Zaka, if you were to go to question 2, does this response mirror the marriage age of 21? Does it the response mirror the, question number 3
in fact,
about polygamy.
If you were to look at
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Ukraine has been fighting a war for more than 500 days. Do you remember how it began? There were long-standing issues, yes, but the immediate trigger was Ukraine's desire to join NATO. Russia said it could not. Ukraine said it could. The West said it could. And so they went to war. And now, can Ukraine join the NATO? America says no. After all these months of fighting, Joe Biden has virtually slammed the door on Zelensky's face. Kiev can have America's money, weapons and support, but not the NATO membership. We'll tell you all about it. In China, prices of goods are falling, and this poses a danger to their economy. China is on the brink of what's called deflation. In India, rains are causing mayhem. The Indian capital has not seen this kind of rain in decades. A neighboring state is on red alert. In Russia, leaked images of Putin's ghost train are doing the rounds. This is luxury on wheels in armored cover. We'll show you the pictures, the headlines first. The Wagner chief met President Putin days after his mutiny, says the Kremlin. The meeting lasted for 3 hours and Putin gave Prigozhin an assessment of the Wagner's actions in Ukraine. Prigozhin led a failed uprising on the 24th of June before a truce was brokered. Uzbekistan's president is re-elected in snap polls. Shavkat Mirziyoyev had called elections after changing the constitution. In the new constitution, the president's term has been extended from 5 to 7 years. In sharp contrast, the Dutch Prime Minister will quit politics. Mark Rutte says he will leave politics after the upcoming election. Just days ago, he resigned from the top job over his migration policy. He's the longest-serving government head in the EU after Hungary's Viktor Orban. Stabbing at a kindergarten in China kills at least 6, including children. The attack took place in the Guangdong province. A 25-year-old suspect has been arrested. There have been at least 10 attacks in schools and colleges in China since 2018. And drama in Wimbledon. Belarus's Victoria Azarenka booed off court. This is after she lost her match to Ukraine's Elena Svitolina. Svitolina did not shake Azarenka's hand in protest over Russia's Ukraine invasion. Remember, Belarus is a key ally of Russia. There's a big spotlight on tiny Lithuania. Around 4,000 NATO soldiers are guarding their borders. Its capital, Vilnius, is shielded by Patriot missiles. All the security is for tomorrow. That's when NATO leaders will convene for their annual summit. It's unlike any summit before. Vilnius is just 200 kilometers from Russia, 350 kilometers from Ukraine, and a mere 35 kilometers from Belarus. So the leaders will be in the thick of it, literally and otherwise. This summit is make or break for this alliance. At stake is their unity and purpose. We know what NATO did in the last century. But what purpose does it serve today? Russia's invasion of Ukraine seemed to answer that question for a while. It gave NATO some much-needed relevance. But 500 days on, that momentum is gone. So in Lithuania, the alliance needs a massive show of unity. Not just photo ops and garden walks. Something much more concrete, which brings us to the agenda. This summit is all about 2 things. One is the accession of Sweden. The second is the possible membership for Ukraine. On both sides, NATO is divided on both these issues. Let's deal with Ukraine first. The Baltic members are clear about their position. They say include Ukraine as fast as possible. Turkey is also on board. Last week, President Erdogan said Kiev deserves NATO membership. Listen to this.
Ukraine deserves NATO membership. I would like to re-emphasize a point that I have always defended persistently. A fair peace creates no losers.
The UK is also seeking a fast track for Ukraine. So what exactly is the problem? Well, Joe Biden in Western Europe. The US president knows that Ukraine is hoping for quick membership. But listen to his latest statement. I think it's premature to say, call for a vote because there's other qualifications that need to be met. In other words, no membership for Ukraine. And we know NATO has an open door policy, but that sounded like slamming the door on Ukraine's face. And Biden isn't alone. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is doing the very same thing. He says no country can join NATO while at war. Now, these two votes are very important. The US is the largest military power in NATO, and Germany is the biggest European economy, so their support is key to inviting Ukraine. If that doesn't happen, Zelensky will be hoping for the next best thing, like some sort of guarantees. One suggestion is that some parts of Ukraine can join NATO. Those parts that are firmly under Kiev's control, they can join NATO. It's an innovative suggestion, but once again, it's highly unlikely to sail. Another suggestion is a roadmap, sort of like a checklist that Ukraine must tick off. What should it do to be able to join the NATO? I can guess what will be on top of that list: ending the war. President Zelensky will also be in Lithuania for this summit. He's expecting some big decisions to be taken there.
We are working with our partners. We are working on security guarantees. We are also working on helping our partners to make some conclusions for this upcoming NATO summit meeting. And we would like to have all the decisions to be made during the summit.
What does this tell you about NATO and Ukraine? A, the alliance is not united, and B, it's not serious about Ukraine. Just look at what Joe Biden is doing for Sweden. They applied for NATO membership last year. Biden is bending over backwards to get them included. In Sweden's case, the roles are reversed. Turkey and Hungary are blocking the membership. And what is Joe Biden doing? On Sunday, he spoke to President Erdogan. He also dangled the sale of the F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. And did it work? Well, Erdogan says he's ready to back Sweden, but he has a condition. The European Union must restart talks to include Turkey in their bloc for them to join the EU. So it's a typical quid pro quo. Sweden can enter NATO if Turkey can enter the EU. Now, some quick background here. Turkey became an EU candidate back in 1999. But the membership talks have been stalled since 2016. They've been waiting all these years to become a member of the European Union. The reason is quite simple: human rights concerns. But now Erdogan has a perfect opportunity. Entry into the EU could be the answer to Turkey's economic woes. The question is, how will Brussels respond? We should get some idea at the NATO summit tomorrow.
First, come and open the way for Turkey at the European Union. And then we will open the way for Sweden, just as we did for Finland. I expressed this to Mr. Biden last night, and I have to underline it again in Vilnius too.
The European Union has a very structured process of enlargement, and with a very, very clear set of steps that need to be taken by all candidate countries, and even by those that wish to become candidate countries, and you cannot link the two processes.
But if you compare these two examples, Sweden and Ukraine, the story becomes quite clear. Sweden is one of the richest countries in Europe. Their military is powerful, their economy is strong, so NATO is more than happy to include them. But Ukraine is the opposite. Their army needs Western assistance, and their economy is spiraling. So what does NATO do? Turn the other way. Now, I know what some people will say about this. Isn't it NATO's choice to invite or not invite members? Well, it is. Why would they include Ukraine and drag themselves into a war? It's a fair point, but then be consistent. The US has no problem flooding Ukraine with lethal weapons, nor with angling for reconstruction projects. But when it comes to NATO membership, Washington disappears. What does that tell you? America's support is not for Ukraine, it's against Russia. And there's a big difference in that. Chances are tomorrow's summit will expose that difference. Well, Ukraine and the war is not the only issue. NATO's plan for Asia is also causing divisions. The alliance sees China as a rising threat, so it's being drawn into the Indo-Pacific. Just look at the guest list. There are 4 special guests: Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol. These 4 leaders are attending the NATO summit tomorrow. And what do they have in common? 2 things. 1, they're not NATO members. And 2, they're leaders from the Indo-Pacific. So what are they doing in Vilnius? Making friends with NATO. This is the second time they've been invited. The first time was last year, the 2022 summit. They attended that too. And why are they being invited year after year? Because the NATO wants to take on China. And this is a big shift. For the longest time, China was not on NATO's radar. That changed in 2019. That's when NATO called out China for the first time. In December 2019, the alliance issued a statement. This is what it said. We recognize that China's growing influence and international policies present both opportunities and challenges that we need to address together as an alliance. This is from an official communique. And what is NATO so worried about? Well, earlier this year, the NATO Secretary General was in Tokyo. This is how he spelled out his concerns.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, this would send a message that authoritarian regimes can achieve their goals through brute force. This is dangerous. Beijing is watching closely and learning lessons that may influence its future decisions.
Beijing is watching closely. He's talking about Taiwan and how China might invade it. Stoltenberg had an unambiguous message. If Putin is allowed to win in Ukraine, Xi Jinping will be emboldened and he'll push to retake Taiwan by force. So NATO wants to be ready in case they get pulled into a conflict with China. Stoltenberg has other concerns too.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan, trying to control critical infrastructure and spreading disinformation about NATO and the war in Ukraine.
So how does NATO plan to deal with the China challenge? The first step is to formalize these partnerships. Foundational agreements are being discussed. Talks with two countries have been concluded. These two countries are Japan and Australia. They have a pact. It's called Individually Tailored Partnership Program, or ITPP. Not very imaginative, but this is what they have. It spells out the key areas of cooperation like maritime security, cyber security, climate change, outer space, emerging technologies like AI, and all sorts of things. Now, these agreements could be signed very soon. And they're working on similar deals with two other countries, New Zealand and South Korea. So the collaboration is set to deepen. This is a clear declaration of intent. But it's not clear how far NATO is willing to go. Will NATO extend the alliance beyond Europe? Will it send troops to Asia? Will NATO join the war if China indeed attacks Taiwan? There is no answer yet, because the alliance itself is divided on these questions. Recently, a proposal was made, a proposal that also made news. NATO wanted an office in Japan. We told you about it. But the idea was shot down by France. So NATO has had to defer its plans for Japan, and this is not just Macron who's opposing such moves. Leaders in the Indo-Pacific also opposed NATO's expansion, like Paul Keating, the former Prime Minister of Australia. Recently, he called the NATO chief a quote-unquote supreme fool, his words, supreme fool. He was talking about NATO's plan for the Indo-Pacific, and he said it's a bad idea. Now, Keating agrees with Macron's line of thinking. So there are divisions. But NATO works on the principles of consensus. For any move to be made, all members must be on board. And as of today, they're not on board vis-à-vis Asia. So they may reach out to regional allies, but the pivot to Asia is still work in progress. And as NATO discusses its Asia plans, here's something it must consider: China's appetite for war. Can Beijing even afford a war? I'll tell you why I asked this. The Chinese economy is on a downward spiral. Look at the latest numbers. China is on the brink of deflation. And what is deflation? Well, throughout this year, we've been talking about inflation and how much it's hurting everyone across the world. Prices are rising. What's happening in China is the very opposite of that. Deflation means prices of goods are going down. They're getting cheaper. And that should be good news, right? Well, it is for the consumers, but for the Chinese economy, it is bad news. Deflation spells trouble on a lot of fronts. The Chinese economy could grind to a halt. People could start spending less because they expect prices to come down further, so they'll hold off on big expenses. They'll wait for the prices to stabilize, and this has an impact on everything. When people spend less, the demand for goods and services declines. Businesses scale down production, they consolidate their operations, they adjust output to match the reduced demand. And this tends to have a trickle-down effect on employment. It leads to job cuts and layoffs. Such a scenario can trigger a recession, and China is at that juncture, or heading there. Now look at the data to understand deflation. In the month of June, prices of goods did not change. There was a 0% shift, meaning no change. And core inflation fell from 0.6% to 0.4%. These are early signs of deflation. Prices of staple goods have started falling in China, like pork. Pork is an essential part of the Chinese diet, and prices of pork have been declining steadily. In the month of May, they decreased by 3.2%. Then last month, in June, they dropped by more than double, more than 7%. And this situation is serious, so much so that the Chinese state has had to intervene. Last week, Beijing made an announcement. It said it will buy more pork for the state reserves. Now, this move is aimed at stabilizing prices. But it's just one small decision. It may not have a sweeping impact. The problem in China is much deeper. The country showed a strong recovery after the pandemic, but that economic rebound has now hit a wall. And Beijing is not doing enough to revive it. For weeks now, investors have demanded a stimulus, but Beijing has dragged its heels. And this is not an unprecedented demand. Back in 2009, when the world was going through a grave financial crisis, China pumped a large stimulus into the economy. This was a package worth $553 billion. $553 billion. This was China's stimulus package. It was focused on the infrastructure sector. So it has been done before. Then why is China hesitating this time? Because they don't have the money. The Chinese state is not as rich as it used to be. There is a massive pile of debt, and this pile is getting bigger. Going by one estimate from January, China's total public debt stood at almost $52 trillion. Let that figure sink in. $52 trillion. It's almost 3 times the size of China's economy. This debt is at record levels, the highest in the last 27 years at least. So Beijing faces a difficult choice. Should it pay this debt, or should it infuse more cash into the economy? The banks are already strained. Reports say non-performing loans are rising, creditors are unable to keep up with payments, and this includes government debt. So Beijing could make an intervention. More bonds could be issued. This will help raise money, also repay some of the debt. But this is a dangerous strategy. You're basically taking more loans to pay the existing loans. China is caught in this vicious cycle. But for how long can they sustain this financial circus? Any expert will tell you this approach is not sustainable. China's economic revival remains on shaky ground. What's worse than unhelpful friends? The ones who can't stay out of your business. Case in point, the United States of America. They specialize in unsolicited offers of help and advice. The latest is for Manipur. You've seen what's happening in the state. There is ethnic violence between 2 communities. Dozens of people have been killed. Many more have fled their homes. It's certainly a big problem, but it's India's problem. Apparently, the US ambassador did not get the memo. He was speaking in Kolkata last week. He said the US is willing to help if required. Listen to this.
We stand ready, willing, able to assist in any way if asked, but we know this is an Indian matter, and we pray for that peace, that it may come quickly.
Now, a couple of problems here. One, no one asked for American help. The local government and security agencies are on the job, so the situation should stabilize. And two, what sort of help is the ambassador talking about? The roots of Manipur's conflict go back centuries. It's a cocktail of multiple issues, of geography, of caste, of power. How could the US possibly understand it, let alone resolve it? It's like asking the English teacher to check the algebra papers. Both of them use the alphabet, but how they use it is very different. Also, don't see the ambassador's comments in isolation. On Sunday, a senior US diplomat landed in New Delhi. What's her mission? To discuss free speech and minority rights. In fact, let me quote from the State Department. The Undersecretary will engage with civil society organizations on freedom of expression and association and vulnerable groups, including marginalized religious and ethnic minorities. So basically, she'll meet a lot of people. Our question is why? And don't look at this as normal diplomatic or official engagement. Look at the optics of it. Just last month, Prime Minister Modi was in Washington. The US media kept talking about human rights and religious freedoms. Some of them called India a backsliding democracy. 2 weeks later, a US diplomat lands in New Delhi. Her job is all about human rights. Does that seem like a coincidence to you? Well, there is no such thing in politics. Until last week, another US diplomat was sweet-talking New Delhi, Kurt Campbell. He looks after Indo-Pacific affairs in the US National Security Council. He said the US has no business lecturing India. Listen to what he said.
Each of our countries is imperfect. I don't think the United States can or should be in a position where it lectures any other country.
All of this in 1 week. From no lecture to offering help to sending human rights officials. What exactly is the US trying to do? Well, nothing new actually. The US does not really believe in stable, committed relations. Their ex-diplomat Henry Kissinger said it best. Let me quote from what he said. To be America's enemy can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. There are so many examples of this attitude, this use and throw behavior by the US. Just look at the last 3 years. Afghanistan's civilian government got a taste of it in 2021. France was on the receiving end with AUKUS, and Ukraine is still dancing to America's tunes. My point is, only one thing matters to Washington, their own interest. And I'm not saying other countries are different. Everyone works for national interest. But the US has a tendency to take you along for the ride, which is why India should be wary. The US ambassador's comments may sound innocent and helpful, just a concerned friend looking to make things right. But the US has never done so in the last 250 years, so why would they make an exception for India now? The fact is, Manipur is an internal issue. So are human rights and religious minorities. True friends accept and trust each other to handle their own affairs, which is why